Good morning and welcome to Coverings Connected. Thanks for joining us for the first live webinar of today, Achieving Green Building Goals with Natural Stone. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items. All attendees are in listen-only mode. You may submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions section of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will share with the presenters during the Q&A at the end, getting to as many as time allows. If you are having problems connecting or any other issues, often closing the window and starting a new window will fix the problem. If you are having problems with your computer audio, call the number on your invitation to listen via your phone. Make sure to visit the website to take advantage of all the other great live webinars scheduled for today. I would now like to turn it over to our presenters, Sarah and Mike. Take it away.
Thanks, Allie. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session today, Achieving Green Building Goals with Natural Stone. Natural stone inherently has a very low embodied energy because it's really nearly complete as a building material before we get to it in its natural state. Mother Nature does most of that manufacturing for us. It's also an incredibly durable material and has proven that over the centuries. And these things you probably already know, but today what we're hoping to show you is that the natural stone industry is committed to defining and lowering our impacts, also being socially responsible, and developing all of the transparency documentation that design teams need in order to fully understand and also quantify our low environmental footprint. So we hope that you enjoyed today's session and walk away with a renewed desire to incorporate more natural stone into your projects. My name is Sarah Gregg. I work with the Natural Stone Institute as the marketing manager. About 2 years ago, I was tasked with taking on the sustainability topic and have been doing tons of research and talking to people, attending shows to figure out what are the best ways that natural stone can fulfill green building goals and what we need to do as an industry in order to produce the right documentation and the right reports and articles to explain how that can be done. And I am joined by our NSI board president, Michael Pico. I'll let him introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am the president of Pico Engineering, along with the current Natural Stone Institute president. And Pico Engineering has been involved with the stone industry. Next year will be our 30th year of business, and we've been involved with natural stone right from design assist to helping specify materials, source materials, engineer facades, you name it, shop drawings, pretty much touched all parts of the industry. And this year as board president, I really made an initiative to really, we think we're behind a little bit with other industries as far as providing documented data for architects and designers to use when specifying natural stone to really compare it to other materials. So Sarah's been championed with this task, and together we've been working very hard as an institute to really work on these initiatives of really providing more data to designers and architects on natural stone. So thanks for joining us, and our learning objectives today is we're going to try and cover some of these things, like what are the attributes that make natural stone a really sustainable choice in your projects, and we'll go over some of the individual benefits of that, including primarily the low embodied energy that's used in manufacturing stone, or not manufacturing, but processing stone. Explore the best practices in the natural stone industry that address things like land impact, excess materials, all the great things that we're doing as an industry that really reduce the carbon footprint, which is one of our main goals. Find out how to source sustainable material, what materials are available locally, and some of the ways you can incorporate this into your project specifications, and identify credits available. And Sarah will go through this quite thoroughly on how you can use the building programs out there and how natural stone can help satisfy some of these sustainability needs that you have. So we'll start with attributes. Here's an example of a restoration project that was a Pinnacle Award-winning project. We are going to turn off our cameras now just to help give you a little more screen and make it a little more visible. Get to the camera here and shut that off. There we go. Yeah, this is an award-winning Pinnacle project, a restoration in a church, and just an example. So when we talk about attributes, natural materials, if we can move to the next slide, please.
Sorry, it's sticking a bit for me today. There you go.
There we go. The key word here is natural. Natural is used in many industries quite loosely as natural surfaces, natural finishes, natural solutions, and all that. But really, natural material is what we are talking about here. It's taken out of the ground. Mother Nature's produced it. And we're really doing very, very little to alter that material other than to cut it into the shape that we need to use and using it as a finished installation. So it really is natural in the true sense of the word. We can move on to the next slide. So when we say natural, I mean, the most important thing is to look at the ingredients of the product that you're specifying or using. And when you do look at natural stone, it is one ingredient. It is the stone itself. Now, there are some stones that may be treated with a sealer or a resin on them, but it's, again, a very, very small component of it. It's very often used to fill in little impurities or little pores in the hole. And many of those products now are also available in water-based. So again, can be very sustainable and green in nature as well. Zero VOCs. We've done independent studies industry-wide with several stones that were studied, and third-party verified that there are no VOCs emitted from natural stone and does not require any testing when specified. Again, with the sealers, you may want to look at if the slabs are treated with some kind of sealer or some of the adhesives used in fabrication, that again, you can look at the products available, and there are several choices available that can also meet these needs as well. Durability is another aspect that we, I think, can challenge other building materials out there. Here's an example of a project in Chicago, a restoration that was, again, a 100-year-old building going through a restoration and looking to the future for several hundred years of usable life in the product. So care and maintenance is a requirement of almost any building material. But what's really important here is to understand that when we're specifying a material, we choose a proper material that's suitable for the environment that we're in. That will also help reduce maintenance requirements and also enhance the durability of the product, so of the stone itself. So picking the right material is always something that's very important. It can be refinished, it can be restored, it can also be reused. So we have several examples. I mean, globally, I don't think there's another building material out there that has examples of sustainable, thousands of year old projects or several hundred years old that are still in perfectly good use now. The White House, the St. Peter's Basilica. I mean, you can go on and on with examples, but 400 and 500-year-old buildings that are still performing very, very well with using natural stone exposed to the elements. Recyclable, I mean, it's a material that can be recycled, can be reused, can be refinished, can be reclaimed. Several uses that you can use for a stone at the end of life of, let's say, a building that needs to be demolished or repurposed. But I mean, it should never end up in a landfill site. That we should always be looking at opportunities to reuse the stone or repurpose it in some fashion. But in the event that it does end up in a landfill, it's going back to its natural state. There's really zero impact on the environment when you do bring it back to to landfill if it does go into that. But first goal is to see if there's uses for it. Here's some examples. I mean, historically, where columns are brought from other sites, other parts of the world, and reused. These are some examples in Istanbul, in the cisterns under the streets, where many of these columns have been repurposed from other uses, and really indicative. You can see the column capitals are all different. So they've been using this practice for centuries now. The Hagia Sophia has many columns that were brought in from other cathedrals and other churches to be reused on the building of that church at the time, and now a mosque. So several examples of great reuse of natural stone. We talk about the low embodied carbon of stone, and we're going to give some examples on that, but there's a lot of data available. There's more and more studies being done on the embodied carbon of the production of natural stone, and several charts out there, several examples of this. Now, there's ways to manipulate data because stone is a very heavy product. You can be represented by weight, can be represented by volume. So just be wary on the way the information is being presented, because the results can be manipulated somewhat. So just make sure that the charts and your comparisons are really comparing apples with apples on what's being presented to you. So if we look at here's we're going to provide some graphic examples. Now, what we're doing now, and Sarah will get into it, is we are developing APDs to really give real data and numbers to substantiate this. But when we look at graphically, just a representation of what it takes to get stone to a final product. It's quarried out of the ground, which requires very little energy in doing that. It's transported, which is probably the biggest carbon impact, is the transportation of natural stone. So depending on where it goes for fabrication and cutting into slabs may impact that. But again, very low energy to cut it into slabs and finish it. So there's no real manufacturing in the process. It's cutting and fabricating and transportation. We compare that with some of the other materials. Engineered quartz, for example, starts with the same raw materials. It's quarried out of the ground or mined out of the ground and crushed. You then require several other additives to it, polyesters, resins, other chemicals that are also require manufacturing somewhere. All those ingredients need to be transported to a manufacturing plant where they're mixed, resins are added, the chemicals are added and put into molds, compacted, and very often heated and cured, which require a lot of energy. So you can just see graphically here the difference in engineered quartz. We can also compare that to porcelain. Again, raw materials coming out of the ground in a similar fashion, in this case, clay, sand, feldspar, other materials, transported to a manufacturing plant, along with other additives, glazing, inks, whatever's used to pigment and get the colors that you want in the porcelain. Again, all those ingredients transported to a manufacturing plant, and then it goes through a process, combining the ingredients, forming them, drying them, pressing them, and then in many cases fired at very, very high temperatures in order to get the glazing and get the finished product and re-solidify all the ingredients that started as solid materials, refiring them to bring them back to solid materials. Sintered stone, similar process. Sintered stone starts with raw materials again, raw materials transported, and really that sintered stone is trying to mimic the process of what Mother Nature does in the ground. So high pressure, high heat in the ingredients when they're mixed together in order to solidify them back into somewhat of a natural material, but requires a lot of energy in that processing to bring it back from the individual ingredients to really make them into a solid material at the end. Another example is precast concrete, and this actually requires a little more. You're starting out with raw materials to make the cement. The cement needs to be go through quite a process of heating and high temperatures to create the cement. You require reinforcing steel, which again is another manufacturing process that goes through the making of the rebar or the wire mesh that's used in the precast. Aggregates, you require aggregates to mix with the cement, which is sand, limestones, other natural materials, all transported to a precast manufacturing plant where it's combined with water, mixed, put into molds and cured. So you can see the differences when we compare back to natural stone and the real simple fabrication process from raw material to finished product when compared to the other materials. So when we look at that from a global warming impact and all the energy required to get from raw material out of the ground to the finished product, again, these could be presented in many different ways, but almost universally, natural stone shows really, really low impact on the carbon footprint and the impact on the global warming when you compare to other building materials in our sector and many beyond that as well. So these were some examples. And now we'll get into best practices, and I'll pass this over to Sarah to review some of this.
All right, thank you, Mike. In this best practices module, we're going to talk about what responsible manufacturing means in the natural stone industry. We do have a natural stone sustainability standard, which very clearly defines best practices for each part of the production process. Quarriers and fabricators have the opportunity to certify compliance to these metrics through a third-party verification process led by NSF. Material that is quarried by a certified quarry and fabricated by a certified fabricator is considered sustainable stone and will be labeled that way. And if you visit our website, naturalstoneinstitute.org/sustainability, you can source these materials. Mike is going to talk to us a little later in the presentation about other ways to source sustainably produced natural stone. But one thing I do want to point out, we are working towards building and acquiring more certifications of quarriers and producers, and there's several options out there now, but not all stone is certified, of course, and if there's options needed for your project that are not currently certified, we encourage you to use the metrics that are defined within the standard in order to vet companies for consideration. And we'll get into all the options for sourcing and specifying, again, sustainably produced stone in the next section with Mike. So the first metric that we'll cover is water. There's quite a lot of water used in the production of natural stone. It's used to reduce dust, to make the working environment more comfortable and safe for our employees. Most of the water that is used in production is recycled. What you see on the screen is a settling pond used by one of the Indiana quarries for limestone. Basically, after water is used in production, it's pumped into a series of these holding ponds where the sediments are allowed to settle naturally. It just takes time for that sediment to settle. Very rarely is there any sort of chemical or anything added into that to facilitate, but sometimes, but most of the time they just naturally settle. And that prepares that water for reuse, and they just pump it back into the production facility and use it over and over again. The goal is to minimize the use of the fresh water and also ensure that any water that is being released back into the environment is safe. You'll actually be surprised to know how much of water is actually recycled. There's companies in our industry that use over 95% of recycled water. And it's good for the environment, of course, because we're reducing the amount of fresh water consumed, but it also lowers the cost of production because we don't need to buy new water from utility companies. Custody and transportation. So stone is heavy. I've heard many stone salespeople over the years say that in their next life they're going to sell cotton. Those samples are not easy to heft around. But probably the biggest environmental impact, which Mike alluded to in his earlier slides for the natural stone industry, is transporting the material. Most domestic quarries are located in close proximity to the production plant, and our standard requires that those distances are tracked. And you, as design people in the design community, can reduce the footprint if the stone in your projects is sourced locally, both quarried and processed in close proximity to the job site. If you're using imported stones, I'd encourage you to ask where their quarry and production plants are located. For example, some stone may be quarried in one country and then transported to China or another country where production costs are lower before it's then shipped back over to the US. And if you can reduce those transportation distances, then you reduce the embodied carbon of that material. The standard also defines requirements for quarries and production facilities to ensure the responsible management of all of the environmental impacts. And these plans include stormwater management, dust control, safety precautions such as signage, barriers to prevent or to kind of keep people safe from the open quarry pits, storage of chemicals, and there's a lot more included within this section. Safety is definitely a high priority in our industry. So let's talk about the land impacts. Our industry has received criticism in the past for ecological changes that are inevitable after quarrying. Each quarry site creates a hole in the ground. That's where we're getting the stone, and we, not trying to deny that. But this hole that we're creating is really very clean. We use water, which, as we talked about a few slides ago, is mostly recycled. There's also diesel emissions from the loaders and other machinery that are well managed as well, but that's really it. Each quarry then lasts for many centuries, some longer. And out of these pretty small holes, relatively, we're bringing hundreds of thousands, millions probably, of square feet of building materials to market. And once the quarry ceases operations, there's a plan in place for its adaptive reuse. So yes, the ecology has changed, but it is still very habitable. Even before the quarry is reclaimed, we'll see fish and other wildlife within those settling ponds that I showed you on a couple of slides back. The picture on the screen here is the Stearns Quarry, which has been converted into a sort of adventure park. There's cliff jumping and swimming, and it's just really a good, nice family-friendly location. And there's other similar examples of this type of post-closure. But before we move on past this land reclamation topic, I just want to also remind you another thing that Mike walked us through is the production process of the other materials. They still use stone in their composition, concrete, engineered quartz, porcelain. They're all using raw materials, and that stone is coming from somewhere. So they are creating these holes as well. Corporate governance, our standard also covers social responsibility, including prohibitions of forced labor, child labor, and the prevention of discrimination. So all companies that have certified to the standard have verified compliance, and that is verified through our third-party auditor. And of course, this topic is incredibly important today. Energy, another very important part of responsible natural stone production. I mentioned during the opening that natural stone has a low embodied energy because Mother Nature does most of the manufacturing for us. What we need to do is extract the blocks from the ground and then transport them to the production facility, cut them to size, and do the finishing work that, of course, varies based on the final product. And as Mike explained, the process of producing other building materials, crushing stone and gluing it back together basically is what the other people are doing. But nonetheless, we still need to be responsible about how much energy we're using. Even though it's much less, we still are trying to lower that footprint. Most of the quarrying energy that we're using comes from diesel fuel, and that's used to power the large machinery that, like what you see in the picture. We're also in the process of collecting data for a set of EPDs that will quantify that energy use, which we expect to be very low in comparison to the precast concrete, engineered quartz, and other building materials. Very little stone from production goes into a landfill. I actually feel quite comfortable saying the number is probably zero. Most of the excess materials is held to the side until the quarry ceases its operation, at which point it is returned to the quarry as part of their reclamation plan. And we also see a lot of quarries that will crush stone for use in landscaping and road base, and that's one example that you see depicted in the picture here. We're also very careful about the chemicals that are used in our production facilities and eliminate those chemicals of concern whenever possible. Each site is required to have a chemical inventory and also a management plan for those chemicals. There aren't a lot of chemicals used in our facilities, but there are some products that benefit from sealers. We do use adhesives and, of course, cleaning products. Each of these materials have low or no VOC options, and so that is always preferred. Health and safety is another big element in that our standard addresses. Perhaps the biggest risk in our industry is silicosis. You've likely read about this problem. Not all natural stone contains silica, but some of it does. Earlier, I talked about water use during quarrying, processing, and also fabrication. And the purpose of that water is to keep the dust down in order to keep the employees safe. And the instances that have been reported on recently have violated that industry best practice and would regularly dry cut stone, which does not use water and allows the particles that are created from that fabrication to enter lungs. We do have an accreditation program for fabricators and installers. We also have this standard for quarriers and producers, and both of these credentials ensure that facilities are being safe in using water to prevent this health issue. So that's covered in this section, along with comprehensive occupational safety plans. And finally, innovation. When companies are going above and beyond in the categories of health and safety, transportation, waste reclamation or reuse, or energy conservation, they are rewarded with extra points during their certification process. So some examples include purchasing safety equipment that results in less injuries, consolidation of on-site activities to reduce the transportation that's required, and also take-back programs for post-consumer materials. So again, all the topics I just talked about are part of our Natural Stone Sustainability Standard. And if the material that you hope to use in your project is not certified, I'd encourage you to use the standard in order to vet suppliers. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to talk about how to source sustainably produced natural stone.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, here's an example of a project actually that we did, Pico Engineering did, which is basically a solid stone stair with 3 post-tension cables running through it. So there is no structure other than the stone there, except for 3 steel strand cables. The original design was a cantilevered stone stair off the wall. That wall was it's a heritage home, so it was a rubble stone wall that would have required a mesh of steel, structural steel being added to it with the stone cantilevered off it. And we thought, why don't we come up with a more creative option? In this case here, we designed a freestanding stair that the owner absolutely loved, and we were able to keep that original rubble stone wall intact without having any impact on it. So again, it's just looking at ways to get more creative and more sustainable, in this case with very little impact on the environment and using other materials other than stone here. So if we move on to the certification that Sarah spoke about and the sustainable stone, we are encouraging more and more companies, and we're getting more people involved, more companies involved. But as of August, I believe this is as of August right now, there are 8 fabricators, 21 quarries at various levels of sustainability, and several materials available that are certified to the standard right now. So, and they are all available on the naturalstoneinstitute.org sustainability NSF sustainability website, as well as the nsf.org. So there are a lot of options available, and we're encouraging architects and designers to start considering putting them into the specifications, actually requiring the quarries and fabricators to be certified to this standard. And that's really our intent, is to, I mean, if it becomes more of a specification requirement, there will be more and more people certifying to the standard. So we're encouraging designers and architects to think about some of these, this verbiage in the specifications to require that a stone quarrier be certified to the standard, or a fabricator, you know, that requires to be that participates in the Sustainable Stone Certification Program and is certified to the standard. So here's a couple of examples of just some wording that could be incorporated into specifications, and we're really encouraging that. Another big thing is trying to source regional materials. Sarah spoke about the transportation impact. I've touched on that. Really, in our industry, I think transportation is the #1 impact on carbon emissions and global warming, is getting the heavy material from one place to another. So where it's feasible, is there a way to use regional materials within your job site, or at least within a certain radius? And that will reduce, obviously, the impact on travel and reduce the carbon impact. So there's resources available here that you can use the naturalstoneinstitute.org directory to look at members within the area, within the region that you're working on. The NGBQA has quarries, granite quarries that are within your area that you can source through their website. And Stones of North America is another site available that can give you the stones available within North America that are being sourced and quarried here. So there's some resources available there, and if you find materials within your area that suit your project needs, that would be a very sustainable option available to you. So again, specification options, we're always encouraging, is there a material available locally that will suit your project needs? We understand that some designs, specific designs, specific requirements, you may not be able to get locally sourced materials, but we always encourage that as the first choice available. Some of the other things that are often overlooked, and I like to, you know, we get involved in design assist on projects, and these are some of the things that we always look at with architects and designers, is understanding the material, understanding the slab sizes available, and working within those to try and utilize the material. So here's an example of, you know, one slab or one block that may be quarried at a certain size and specified, and you know, the slab sizes or the field that you're designing to would fit into the slab in this fashion. And you can see that the yield available for a panel size this height graphically would be very little on slabs that size. Whereas if we go to the next slide, by adjusting the panel sizes just a little bit, we reduce the amount of waste dramatically. So understanding the material, understanding are there small little nuances we can do in the design to really have a significant impact on the usable amount of stone on the project. So again, something to consider early on in the design process. We always encourage, you know, understanding the physical properties of the stone. You know, there are some stones that historically are typically specified at 2 or 3 inches thick because that's what's been done in the past. Well, if we understand the material properties and we do calculations on it and engineer it properly, in many cases, there's no reason why we can't go thinner with the same stone. And really, the impact on the final product, nobody knows how thick that stone is. So we can save a lot of money and a lot of impact on the environment by getting a lot more square footage out of the same amount of stone. Some of the design details also, again, when we're looking at thickness and design, how do we achieve that? I know many times the architects want to see a thick stone on the outside of the building to give an impact. Even though we're using thinner materials, they want to show a more robust, thicker corner. So how are there ways of achieving that? There's many options available. Again, depending on the project and the project needs, these can be achieved in different ways, and just put it up there for different things to consider when you're at the early stages of design. The other big thing is choosing your materials. This is a real example on a project that we worked on. It was a residential project, very high residential, high-end residence, where the architect, or the designer specified this material here and said, we absolutely love this material except for the dark red orangey material in the middle there. So can we use everything except that? Which we did. We tried to encourage against it. So you can see that if you have slabs like this and you get rid of that material, you have a lot of waste. You require a lot more material to get what you need done because you're very limited on the slabs that don't have that red material. I always encourage architects and designers, pick a material that you love for the naturalness in it. All the beauty that's in the variations in the color and the patterns are there, are really, and if it doesn't suit your needs or doesn't suit your design needs, then let's look for another material that's maybe more sustainable that can still meet your needs without, cutting away a big part of the slabs that are specified. And when we talk about all these things, these are all things that can have a huge impact on pricing. You can see that if we specify material like the example I just gave previously, that requires X amount of square feet, but we're only using 30% of each slab, we need 3 times as much material to get the yield that we need to do the project, which will obviously drive the price way up. So impacts on price, impacts on lead time. So we always encourage, get somebody involved at the early stages of the project that can help you mitigate some of these things. And again, always looking to achieving your design goals, but also with sustainability and economical ways to get there. So we encourage, the design phase is extremely important and can have a huge impact. Cost, impact, carbon footprint can all play into some of these factors. So next part of the program is going to be the Green Building Program. Sarah's done a fantastic job, done a huge research on this over the last few years for us as an industry. So I'm going to pass that back to her to share some of what she's learned on the Green Building programs here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. Very eye-opening with the slides on the design phase. So hopefully that gets people thinking a little bit about how they can reduce impacts and costs and lead times. So green building programs, what we're going to talk about is how we can get credits through the various green building schemes that are popular. LEED, definitely the #1 green building scheme that we see here in North America. This on the screen is a list of all the credits that can be achieved using natural stone. And in the slides to follow, I'll explain how to get the documentation needed to get these credits. So this is all from the V4.1 for new construction, so version 4.1 for new construction. There are, of course, other versions of LEED. 4.0 is active now, but we expect 4.1 to be published very soon. And there's different schemes for new construction versus a remodeling project. So anyway, the credits that we're going to talk about, I just want to point out that we're talking about version 4.1 for new construction. So there's a credit for using materials with environmental product declarations. There's a credit for the sourcing of raw materials, and there's been some big changes there, so I'll explain those. Also material ingredients, heat island reduction, that solar reflectance index, low emitting materials, so watching out for those VOCs, certified multi-attribute products and materials, that's a pilot credit, and another pilot credit for social equity in the supply chain. So the first thing is natural stone is inherently non-emitting, and LEED's low emitting materials credit specifically mentions that the use of stone qualifies for this credit. So there's no additional documentation needed in order to get that. However, you can access technical documentation from the Natural Stone Council that verifies that stone has 0 VOCs. Under the Living Building Challenge, this is documented with Declare labels, and there are also some Declare labels that are available for natural stone that were published by Cold Spring. All of the documentation that I'm going to reference in the next several slides can be found on our website at naturalstoneinstitute.org/sustainability-resources. I'd encourage you to write that down and check out that website. We have a lot of documentation there already, but we're also adding more, weekly, monthly. Whenever I get my hands on something new for natural stone, I make sure that it's up there so that that becomes a resource for design teams and also companies in the stone industry. So the next one is solar reflectance in both LEED and sites. Light-colored natural stones used for cladding and paving can achieve the heat island reduction credit. The Natural Stone Council did a case study on SRI and heat index and heat island that has statistics for many natural stones' SRI values. But basically, if the SRI value is at least 0.33, then it would qualify. So most light-colored natural stones will qualify. Environmental product declarations. We've got a few slides to explain this one. With LEED, projects get credit for using materials with published EPDs. And the points vary from version 4.0 to 4.1. For 4.1, industry-wide EPDs are valued at 1 product, and product-specific EPDs are valued at 1.5 products, towards the requirement of 20 total products needed for new construction. For the Living Building Challenge, their materials petal calls for the project to account for the total embodied carbon of the project, which would utilize EPDs for calculation. The data that's included in those EPDs goes into the calculator tools to make those estimations. There are many EPDs that have been published for natural stone already. We're also currently working on a set of industry-wide EPDs for natural stone materials in the U.S. for natural stones in the following product categories. Exterior cladding is the first one, flooring and paving is the second, and the third is countertops. And these documents are expected to be completed next summer. Once the industry-wide documents are published, there are several of the participants that plan to pursue product-specific EPDs that compare to the industry average. So by the fall of 2022, you can expect a lot of new data out there and available for natural stone. So make sure you join that sustainability mailing list that we have to ensure that you're informed of when these documents are available. And you can also access them whenever they are published on that same website that I talked about in a couple of slides back. So regional materials. Previously, regional materials were defined in LEED as within 500-mile radius of the project site in its own credit. But now it's part of the materials and resources credit 2, 3, and 4. So if your product has salvaged material, that's 2, an ingredient report, that's 3, or an EPD, that's 4, if you have any one of those, then you can get additional credit if it's also 100% extracted and manufactured within 100 miles of the project site. So it's a pretty tough credit to achieve, but it is possible. With natural stone especially, there are quarries throughout the U.S., so look at those regional materials. The Living Building Challenge is scaled based on a percentage of the material project costs, starting at 500 kilometers from the construction site. And sites is based on the LEED rating system, so similar to that one. Materials reuse. Salvaging scrap stone, such as remnants or stone from the boneyard, we call it, should qualify for this credit if you file for it. Countertop end cuts would also qualify. So I'm going to try to explain this a little bit better. Within natural stone quarries, if blocks have any atypical veining or coloring, remember that material that Mike showed us previously where there was the big red marking in the middle of that. A lot of people don't like that, and so those blocks are typically set aside, and they wait there until a project comes along that desires more of a variegated look. Or if no one comes along to purchase those materials, they will eventually be returned back into the quarry after its closure. But you can file for this salvaged stone credit if you are working with the quarrier to use this boneyard material. Further down the production line at countertop fabrication facilities, there's also a lot of opportunities for using end cuts. Smaller pieces that are left over from other jobs are typically kept in inventory for the purposes of reuse. Natural stone is also recyclable. There's really no reason natural stone should end up in a landfill, but of course that's mostly dependent upon the company performing that demolition. There are companies in our industry that also offer take-back programs for this material, and there's other companies that solely exist to reclaim and redistribute material from other projects. But this is definitely a big opportunity for credits using natural stone, and something that I don't think many design teams or people in the stone industry realize. So definitely take a look at that credit and work with your quarriers early on to identify that material that they would consider in the boneyard and that could qualify for this salvaging scrap stone credit. Material ingredients. LEED recognizes 7 different material ingredient reports, including HPDs, declare labels, cradle-to-cradle certifications, and there's a few others. Similar to the EPD credit, you need multiple product reports in order to achieve the credit. There are some HPDs and declare labels published for natural stone. We're also developing a set of industry-wide HPDs for natural stone. The HPD Coalition has a special exception for geological materials that allows us to create this industry average documentation on behalf of the industry, and we hope to have those published before the end of this year. The Living Building Challenge uses the declare labels also for their version of this credit. There is a pilot credit in LEED for using materials certified to multi-attribute industry standards, and we believe that our natural stone sustainability standard qualifies for this and have submitted a formal request for approval through the GBCI. We're told we'll have an answer for that request by the end of 2021. We are still waiting to hear back from them, but we do expect that to come through and that it will be listed there and no additional documentation will be needed on the design team's part in order to achieve that credit, because we'll be just listed right under there. In the meantime, before we get that actually listed there, you can submit a credit interpretation. And other companies that are certified to our standard have shared with us that they help design teams draft this interpretation, and they tell us that it's very likely to be accepted and has been accepted for past projects. So for the Living Building Challenge, our standard is specifically recognized in the materials petal under the responsible industry imperative. Right now what it says is, for stone, project teams must advocate to quarries and/or manufacturers of all dimension stone products used within the project for certification under the Natural Stone Council 373 standard. And we've sent them a request to edit that just to be a little bit more inclusive and also recognize the change in ownership of the standard that took place earlier this year. And it will likely be changed again by the end of the year. Stone must either be certified to the Natural Stone Sustainability Standard, or design teams must advocate to quarries and/or fabricators of all dimension stone products used within the project for certification. So this one a little bit more straightforward than LEED, but both of them we hope to make a lot easier for design teams very soon. Social equity in the supply chain is another one of the pilot credits within LEED, and we have submitted a request for approval for companies certified to our Natural Stone Sustainability Standard, which does currently address prohibition of forced labor and child labor and prevention of discrimination. There is one element of this credit that we do not specifically address in our standard, and that is related to the right to assemble. There are some union regulations that make this tricky, and I understand that many industries, not just us, have the same issues with this credit's requirements. So we have submitted our thoughts on that and hope to see a solution from them soon. In the meantime, you can submit a credit interpretation like we talked about with the multi-attribute industry standard. And finally, under the Living Building Challenge, you can receive credit for creating a biophilic environment. And of course, stone is beautiful, natural material with many versatile options for creating a space that promotes wellness through our innate connection with nature. This project is Canadian Human Rights Museum. From 2015, it received a Pinnacle Award. This is another one that Mike worked on or probably led, but very cool project.
Yeah, it was.
So kind of to recap those LEED credits, this is the same slide I showed before. In version 4.1 for new construction, you can get credit for environmental product declarations, for sourcing of raw materials if the project is close to a quarry, the quarry that's used in the project, material ingredients, heat island reduction, low emitting materials, in those 2 pilot credits, certified multi-attribute products and materials, and social equity in the supply chain. And again, make sure you bookmark that page, naturalstoneinstitute.org/sustainability-resources. So just to recap, we've gone through a lot of stuff today and hopefully have opened your eyes to some things that you weren't aware of or familiar with before. But number one, natural stone has a lot of inherent attributes that make it an easy solution for green building goals. It's durable, it's recyclable, there's no VOCs, it's got a single ingredient. There's a lot of things about natural stone with no documentation needed that just kind of spark that light that this is a great solution for green building. Number two, stone quarriers and fabricators are following industry best practices for sustainable production. We've defined what those metrics are. We've got a lot of companies that are certified to that standard, and even if they are not yet certified, you can use that standard to help vet companies for your projects. And finally, natural stone satisfies many credit requirements within those green building schemes. And hopefully you've learned a little bit more about which of those credits we can help you with in the slides that we just covered. And I want to, before we close out, call out a few more of our resources for the architecture and design community. The first is our qualified labor program called Accreditation. You can find companies that have certified to this qualified labor credential on our website, naturalstoneinstitute.org/qualified labor. If you are using the spec channel BSD spec link to create the specs for your projects, we are listed there, so you can turn it on by checking a box. So very simple. But we do also have language that can help you make sure that the companies working on your projects are well qualified. We also have our Building Stone magazine. Members of the design community can receive a free subscription to both the print and digital editions. Really a wonderful magazine that highlights projects that feature natural stone and just goes through all of the ins and outs of the project and what was required in order to complete that. And then also the Natural Stone Resource Library, where you can download over 200 different documents, including the Dimension Stone Design Manual. naturalstoneinstitute.org/resource library. So thank you for getting through that with us, and we would be very happy to field any questions now if there have been any submitted.
Thank you so much, Sarah, Mike. Right now we don't have any questions, so we have a little bit of time if people want to go ahead and submit. In the meantime, is there anything that you didn't get a chance to cover in that extremely interesting presentation that you want to talk about while we're waiting for any questions that might pop up?
I don't know. I mean, I think we have covered a lot. A lot of it's very technical, packed a lot of information in a short period of time. But kind of just to reiterate the recap there, I mean, it's very evident that natural stone is a great choice on sustainable green initiatives. So This is really what we're working on to share with everyone today, and you know, to have consideration in design of your buildings, to consider natural stone as one of your choices in building materials.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing I would add is a little bit more information on the EPDs that we're creating. You know, that's really the center of my world right now is getting that started. It's been quite a process to get this far, but we are currently collecting data from companies in order to quantify those impacts, and we're really excited to see those results and to share them with everybody once they're available next summer.
Great. Well, I think it's a testament to how thorough your presentation was, that there was absolutely, oh, we got a question. Look at that. I manifested into the universe. The question is, have current supply chain issues affected delivery time?
You want me to take that, Sarah?
Go for it, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a problem that we hope is a short-term problem, but I mean, it's impacted, I think, all industries. Again, locally, regionally sourced is a good option because overseas and shipping is becoming a little bit more of an issue with lead times for sure. But it's also having an impact on local materials because the demand is getting higher because people are looking at other options that are local. So there's definitely a short-term crunch, not just on the raw material, but on blades for fabrication, on diamond tools, on all various other products that are impacting the industry. Again, no different than others, but we're hoping that it's short-lived and that you know, we'll get out of this sooner than later. But definitely impacting lead times in the short term for sure.
And just a plug, we will be having a supply chain webinar later today as part of Coverings Connected, so please join that as well. Here's another great question. Would it be possible to use slides with customers, or are there staff members available to help present to customers regarding the environmental sustainability of stone?
So this presentation is part of our CEU program, and we have a network of certified speakers across the U.S., even worldwide. We have some overseas as well. And we have a tool on our website where you can request connection with one of our CEU speakers. So yes, we would be happy to help you out with that problem. If you send me an email or go onto our website to the CEU pages, Continuing Education Program, then you can find how to request a speaker for presenting to your group.
Great. I think people would definitely be interested in that for sure. Okay, I don't think we have any other questions. So I want to thank Sarah and Mike for an absolutely terrific session on behalf of Coverings. Thank you all for joining us. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you could complete it and provide your feedback. We hope you enjoy the rest of today's events and will join us for Coverings 2022 live and in person in Las Vegas at the Las Vegas Convention Center from April 5th through 8th. Registration is now open and is complimentary as always. To visit coverings.com. Thank you so much again, Sarah and Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.